Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today, Alyssa Marie and I are going to be talking about women and being unseen and sort of this conversation that Jane Seymour is having as it relates to healthcare and also a health condition. But the question of if women are unseen as they get older in life made me stop and pause. Because contrary to her feelings and her experience, I feel like women or girls can be unseen, sort of throughout their lifetime. And maybe it's made worse by age, but it's not necessarily exclusively to somebody over the age of, I don't know, pick a year, say 60 and above. And so that's what I wanted to talk to Alyssa about today in terms of, you know, Jane Seymour points out to the fact that, she is a celebrity, she's an actress, she's an ambassador for all sorts of movements and things like that. And she really makes a personal statement about how if she as a woman and as a celebrity and a woman who's well known and recognizable feels unseen at her age, then how do other people who don't have that celebrity, how are they treated either during their elder years or, in my opinion, during any time? And that's really what I'd like to focus on today. Before we get really into it, Alyssa, do you have something you want to say in terms of what this brought up for you in your mind when I brought this topic up?
When we first started talking about it, I think that, being almost in my 40s, I was like, I don't think that I've experienced this, as strongly as kind of what you were first describing. But we were sort of talking about, I view it as when I get older, I'll be considered more reputable, more uh, seen as experts in my field and that sort of thing. And so it's an interesting topic because really, time will only tell as far as whether that is in fact true. And it's possible that I may have that same experience. So my hope is that I would be, viewed in a different way. But, from what I'm kind of hearing and kind of that idea of being unseen or not taken for granted or those sorts of things seems like it might be more persistent than I'm aware of, and maybe it's something that is going to kind of affect me as I get older.
Yeah, I don't know if my experience, or let's even call it my bias, comes from the fact that I'm from a pretty traditional, what I would commonly say is a female oppressed, more culture of where, men are really identified as the decision makers. And so being in a family of five where there were three men and two women, and my brothers, both sort of saddling me, one older and one younger than me, I felt a lot of my time when I was growing up that nobody really cared what my thoughts were. I mean, they would usually either, the men would make a decision, or that nobody really wanted to know if I had any opinion about something. And believe it or not, I came from a pretty liberal, non-traditional Indian family. So I was not raised to be made to feel intentionally that I was a second class citizen. But in certain ways, I felt like that. I felt that, my father and my mother would usually defer to my older brother as we got older. Definitely that was seen. I thought it was very interesting that, as my parents made their will and created a trust, both my brothers were in charge of different things and I had like no role. Even the healthcare power of attorney, which would make the most amount of sense for me because I've been in healthcare for all of my career. Um, my brothers were in charge. One brother was in charge of that, and one brother was in charge of the financial decision making. And so I thought, as I didn't, as my parents got older and I became more aware of these things, I thought that was really ironic. So I guess it's a very specific feeling for me that I feel that way. And granted that I don't come from a very conservative, traditional family, I still felt like that was something One of the things that I found interesting too, and I'll throw this out here for you, Alyssa, is that I was trying to find out like what other like areas do are maybe boys and girls treated differently. And to my surprise, I found that teachers actually give girls higher grades than boys, and that is in all subjects, not only areas like humanities or language or reading comprehension. Where girls are known to excel. Even in areas in math and science where traditionally boys do better than girls, teachers are apparently based on research shown to give girls higher scoring than boys. I found that to be really unusual. Do you have any reaction to that, Alyssa?
I think it's interesting. I'm kind of I think similar to you, taken a little bit aback by that, although I do kind of see that I could see that panning out. And having I kind of reflect on like my own children, like um I definitely see different dynamics between them and their teachers, but I'm curious to like what they equated that to, or what they kind of like, was there any discussion of why that was?
There was, and sadly, I didn't read too much about that, so I can't explain that. But maybe we'll come back to that at a later point,
Yeah.
at a later date when I've had a chance. It just sort of shocked me so much. I do think that some of it has to do with behavior, and some of the teachers like or dislike. I think was one of the things that I remember reading about. Like if a boy is a little bit more rambunctious and hard to keep still, that their grades might be associated with that versus most girls tend to be a little bit easier to control. And their perception of their learning is differently interpreted than I think with boys. But the actual research study, I can't quote the reasons why that is. But the other thing you and I talked about was related to career was age discrimination. And I had shared the fact that I've had multiple friends of mine who are over the age of 60 who have great qualifications for their area of expertise that were not hired, not even interviewed, primarily because they were thought to be overqualified. So when they pushed for feedback, that's what they heard was that they were overqualified. So here is like the irony of like in your 30s and 40s, we're trying to be, given the credit we deserve for our years of experience, our expertise, and things like that. And then, at this age, at 60 plus, these women are said they're overqualified and they are not suitable for the positions that they applied for. It just seems like I don't know if it's like a veiled discrimination or if it just feels like we pick and choose when women are seen to be appropriate or qualified, and that window seems to be really short. Um, I don't know. It sort of disgusts me a little bit, Alyssa. What about you? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think about like so I had put in like the idea of ageism, and I really, this is something that when we talk about discrimination and things like that, it's obviously on the list of things that potentially people can be discriminated about. And I have thought about in the past, like, why is that? Like, why would somebody who's older, again, because I'm thinking of like they're older, they have more experience, they bring a wealth of knowledge to the table, so like all of the positives. But I was trying to think of the other side of that, like how could that be viewed alternatively? And I think that some of the things come up, and these are things that I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on, is that if it's an older individual, they may not be able to take criticism or constructive criticism or feedback very well, because they do have a wealth of experience. Like if they have more experience than the person who's hiring them, there might be a fear that they will try to overstep their role. And again, I'm not saying that this is what would happen, but I think that that's part of that perspective of like, if somebody hires somebody that's older, that they may not be open or receptive to feedback from a superior who's maybe younger than them, or that they're set in their ways, and so therefore they can't uh you know really change their perspective or change or adapt to the changing landscape, if you will. So, I mean, again, I'm not condoning or saying these things are true, but I think that that's the other side of the coin where people are saying these things. But I don't know how you would know that without hiring somebody. And like, I don't know how you would even figure out whether somebody would or would not have those characteristics, in the hiring process. So those are a couple things that came to mind, but like I said, I'm curious to hear your kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually had experiences where and I'm assuming we're talking about women with other women, or are we talking about older men, younger female employee, or does it matter?
I would say either or. I think it's either. I don't think it's. I think it's in general when hiring older individuals, although we're talking about women, so we'll kind of stick to that. But I think when hiring older individuals and like there's the question of like, why wouldn't you hire them? Those are some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah,
Sure.
I do agree. I've had a couple experiences where we have hired a couple women, and this is throughout my career. I mean, I was promoted to a supervisor manager level, and one of the women who um really didn't have any more experience than me was an older woman who got into the field of counseling later in life. And she felt that her life experience trumped my work experience, even though she was newer to the field than I was. And I had a really hard time understanding that. And so I think that sort of ties into what you're saying. I do think that women at a certain age, maybe because they haven't been given respect throughout their career, they do hang on to that a little tightly, and they do have a little bit more of a difficult time being open to other feedback and looking at it for different things. I think I will also say that most of the people that I've met that are really difficult to adapt to change typically have been women that I've worked with. Um, and so, but that's also because I work in healthcare, and most women, most of healthcare are women. So that, of course, is something to point out. But I do feel that there is some legitimacy to what you're saying, but of course, it would have to be case by case, just because there's not a generalization that we can make. But I do think about, when we've talked about in previous podcasts about women not being taken seriously or their concerns being dismissed, whether it was during a pregnancy or during, some healthcare crisis. And we've talked about that a couple times in this journey that we've been on. I do feel like there is a common thread with that, where women's concerns are really dismissed and women have to work much harder to get their point across about some fears that they may have. And I know that that is something that really does unnerve most people, including us as women, if we feel like we're not being heard. So that is something that, when Jane Seymour was talking about being unseen, I do agree that women have to work harder. And I think they need to have more quantitative kinds of, notes with them when they're talking about how long they've been feeling this way and things like that. So I do think that it is a general kind of commentary in society where women's feelings are dismissed. But I also think that, there are so many stereotypes that older women are tied to, the crazy cat lady, the woman who is alone and is widowed and has spent too much time alone, or, you know, the funny card setter, the woman with the purple colors around her. She's like a crotchety old woman. So I do think that there are some stereotypes that make this a little bit more challenging. But I think those are societal influences. So I don't know if I answered your question, but these are all the thoughts that popped into my mind when you were talking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does. I think that those stereotypes do play into that and they do influence how people are seen. I mean, I think that, um, again, when I'm thinking about like discrimination, like there is, we have a term for it, ageism. Like there is a impact that has on older individuals in a range of different ways that is, it is goes back to that concept of being unseen, of like being passed over or not taken seriously because of a mere characteristic, your age being something that you can't control, similar to your skin color and those sorts of things. Like, it's not something that you can control, yet it's being used as a way to eliminate you or remove you from potentials. Again, if we're talking about career, but I think even in different avenues, I think globally that it leads back to the idea of being unseen and not having a voice or not feeling like you can override that in some form.
And one of the things that you had mentioned before we got live on this recording was that you feel, or I think we were just talking about it, I may have mentioned it, that we feel more confident at this age. As we get older, we as ourselves just feel more confident. And so we're more likely to want to share our opinions or have firm beliefs, have a sense of confidence in the way we look and the way we dress and the way that we hold ourselves. And yet society is sort of taking that away from us. What do you think? I mean, I guess it's also important to talk to our listeners about how do we overcome that? What are some things that you have done in your career? I mean, you've been in your career now upwards of 10, 15 years, and you deserve to be acknowledged as an expert. And so, what are the things that you might have done in your time at work to show yourself as someone who has earned that respect and deserves that kind of, um, care and treatment? Have you done anything that you have found yourself to be successful?
It's such a good question. I had to like pause for a minute because I'm like, I don't know that there's anything that I did specifically. I mean, I think the fact that I teach other people to do what I do helps me. It kind of puts it back in check because I think that when we've talked about the imposter syndrome and like how that can play its like rear its ugly head sometimes. And so I think that even though like you said, I had 10, well, I think it's closer to 15 now, years in the field and worked and have kind of, I have titles and things that say that I know what I'm doing, but I still that again, I feel like another 10 years from now, I'm going to feel really confident and like the imposter syndrome's not going to affect me as much, but I wonder if that's, kind of again, maybe it's a perception of what I think things are gonna look like. I don't know what they're gonna look like, but I think that helping to teach other people what I do, I think helps me to feel that confidence because I can say, okay, that they come in and they don't know the first thing about what I do. And so teaching them is a way for me to reboost my confidence by saying, okay, I can teach this, so I must know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The other things that I was thinking about, like what has helped me um, over the years too. And I do think, if you suspect that somebody who works with you or somebody that's in your professional network, you know, um, you doubt so much is done virtually anymore, that it's important sometimes to drop in things like, oh, I've been in the field for 10, 15 years. I think in the field of counseling, that's really a badge of honor. Like when you've been in the world of psychology or things like that for 10, 15 years, I think that is really an impressive chunk of time. So I think that's important. I know that you teach classes and you teach at I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but I'm assuming it's a university downtown. I think that's really important because I think when you're an adjunct facility faculty member, I think that garners a lot of respect because, you're teaching sort of the next generation of practitioners. And I think that's important. And I think that sometimes when you can share case examples of other situations that you've been involved in, that you can show like this is what went well, this is what didn't go well, this is what I learned, almost like peer to peer reviews. I think that's really helpful because I think, even if you've been in the field for 10 to 15 years, you have hundreds of cases and people in your mind that you can draw from on experience. And sometimes I think that when we're younger, we don't share that as much because we don't want to sound I don't know, maybe obnoxious or maybe like we are sort of tooting our own horn because God forbid as women we do that. But I think that those are all different ways that I think that we can show our expertise in different ways that people hear that. And typically now, I will say that if people, and it is sort of strange because at the ripe old age of 56, nobody really treats me like I don't know what I'm doing, which is very different for me. Because I think we all go through this feeling of, imposter syndrome, or, do I know enough about anything to talk about it? But yet, I don't know. In the last couple of years, for sure, I feel like there's just been a switch. Like I've gone from, me doubting myself and being able to feel like people take me seriously to almost feeling like I have this like commanding presence and people look to me. And then that freaks me out a little bit too. But so I don't fully understand it. I don't know what that is. And I can't figure out what I've done or not done. But it's just something I do think it's age, I guess. Maybe it's those wrinkles are really worthwhile. I don't know. I'm not really sure because that young, fresh face didn't really serve me very well for a long time. So I don't really have any answers, but I don't know. Maybe it is just, hitting another 10 years and being closer to, 50 or 55 that brings like this automatic credential. I don't know. I'm not really sure. It's sort of bizarre, but I guess we could hear from our listeners and see if they have experienced something similar.
Yeah, we'll have to ask them because I mean that's what I'm uh referring to is like that's what I perceive as, the next decade will get me to be able to say like I got this. I know what I'm doing. I feel pretty confident in, in the work that I'm doing. But it's interesting that I don't feel that now, even though like you were saying that I have, 10, 15 years under my belt. So I don't know if that brings us full circle to the idea of feeling unseen, or how that plays into it. But I think that it's interesting, that that we just have different experiences based upon how we're how we're perceiving, our abilities and things like that. And so I think it's definitely an interesting topic and one that I would be curious to hear how what other people, if they do have that experience or if they perceive that they wouldn't have it, later on in life, like how do other people view that?
I think one of the thoughts I had while you were talking just now that just sort of flooded my mind was like car shopping. I remember if I'm ever involved with my car, whether it's taking my car for an oil change or if my husband and I are looking for a car to purchase, it's like if I'm with my husband, nobody ever talks to me. But if I'm by myself and I'm going to get my oil changed or something like just a routine maintenance kind of thing, I sort of feel like they don't take me seriously and they try to um, get me like just the stereotype. Like they try to sell me more things that I need. And then I usually will call my husband and say, hey, they say I need to replace my windshield wipers or, my oil filter or something. What do you think? And then, if I get a text from my husband who's like, that's ridiculous, that's a no. And then I tell him that, then all of a sudden the discussion is closed. But if I was to manage that conversation by myself, they really try to influence me to buy this, whatever. And there are ways that I play into that. Like if I don't want to have a conversation and I'm with my husband, I really make myself invisible because I don't really want to have this chatter about my car or whatever's going on. But it has irked me a couple of times when I've gone car shopping with my husband when it's my car and it should be my preferences. Nobody cares what I want. Like it's rare. Even if my husband says, this is for her, this is my wife's car, like, what we're looking for. It's like they still run all the details by him. And they don't ask me like, I would imagine questions like, "Oh, well, how long what is your commute like?" Or, "Do you like sitting above, high up or down low?" Or, "What kind of luxury items do you want in your car?" Or whatever. Like they don't ask me any of that. They just talk to my husband, even though he's been clear that it's my car that we're looking for. Have you had experiences like that, whether you're with your husband or without your husband, where people like completely treat you one way or another?
I can't say within car buying. I will say like so what I was thinking actually is kind of like a caveat to that is that a lot of times my husband will send me to get like some work done or like I had to get the tires rotated like a couple I think like a month ago. And I was like, I don't know what I like. I don't okay. Like, I will take the car in, but I don't know the first thing about tire rotation or why that's even necessary, and so I actually took it and luckily, I have, uh I don't know if the mechanics just know me now or whatever, but I was just like, "Hey, can you explain this to me?" Like, I was like, "I'm not educated in this area, but I'm gonna get educated because I don't wanna walk in the next time and be like, I don't know what I'm doing." And so I asked the gentleman, he was lovely and he was like, "Oh yeah, let me explain to you, blah blah, for the wear and tear on the tires." And so like it was one of those things that I don't always do that, but I think I was like, I'm gonna educate myself because I don't want to have that experience where I'm just like walking in and not sure. And if they told me I needed new something or other, I probably would be like, okay, great, put it on the car. Um, but I probably would do the same thing. I'd probably call or text my husband and say like, what do you think? But I think that that's one of those things where it does definitely feel uh like I felt out of place saying, "Hey, I don't know anything about this." Um, and luckily I got a mechanic that was like, "Oh, let me explain it to you." Like not like, "Oh, you have no clue. Let me like pull one over on you." So I think that's slightly different experience, but also a similar thing where it's an area that I'm not familiar with. Like, what do I do with this? How do I maneuver through it? I think that we run into those types of situations. I was hard to find another example of that. But I did come up with one. I was thinking about like when we do conference, like parent teacher conferences. Sometimes it happens, sometimes not, depending on the teacher. But sometimes like they'll talk primarily to my husband. Um, Even though like it should be pretty even. So I think that it can come up in different areas, but it definitely depends on who the person that you're talking to and how they're interacting with you. So, and I think most of the teachers are female, so it's an interesting dynamic either way.
Yeah. I have two thoughts about that that occurred to me. One of them is that maybe that is a way to be seen is to ask questions of the person and engage them in a conversation where, they're either explaining something to you and all of a sudden that dialogue is now different. So I think that could actually be a really good strategy because instead of them ignoring you and assuming, I think showing interest in their work and getting them to explain that to you might be something, a way to engage them and maybe even increase your credibility a little bit because you're not then brushing them off either and what they're doing, nor are you feeding into just taking their word, you know, um, as golden, but that they sort of have to, teach you, show you, prove to you that, that's something. The other thing that I think is related to that in a little way, and I think also can build credibility with a younger person or an older person, is that, something that, my daughter was talking to me about. Um, she has, she sent an email to the director of her unit, sharing some concerns about staffing numbers as a nurse. And I was really surprised and actually pretty thrilled that the older director, I don't know how much older she is. My daughter is 27, so but I don't know how old the director is. But the director sort of turned tables on my daughter and said, well, what would you suggest that we do? Like, these are the limitations we have. And so, if you have concerns about staffing, how would you manage that if you were in my shoes? And though my daughter did not see that as being a positive interaction, I actually thought it was very positive because I said to her, my daughter, like, that's what's important. I think when you're trying to prove yourself in a work environment, no, I mean, I've been a manager for 25 years. I don't want somebody, especially somebody who's young and new to the field, making asinine conversation comments like that to me, just because I don't need somebody to complain. I need somebody with a solution. And if you've got ideas, share them. But if you're just calling me or, emailing me to complain, that really isn't productive. And I said to my daughter, I said, I see that as an opportunity to grow you. Like if she wasn't invested in having you think, then she would have just ignored your email and just went about her business. But the fact that she engaged with you and said, well, what would you do? Here are the limitations we have. Here are the state laws for what patient safety is, which is what my daughter was concerned about. How would you dole out the staffing, given the fact that there isn't enough staff to take care of every, because there's 3 departments within labor and, mother baby. There's, labor, there's postpartum, and then there's a special nursery. So I said the law, sort of regulates how many nurses have to be by with the, number of patients, but you only have this much staff. So how do you do that given the fact there's vacations, time off, whatever? And I said, I think what you felt is uncomfortable because she turned tables on you. I said, but I think that's an important thing because she's asking you to think through a very real life situation. And I said, you're never going to learn how to manage and understand what it is like to be in her shoes unless you understand all the things that she has to evaluate when she makes that decision. And life on life's terms is sometimes, rolling the dice and taking a risk, but you take the lowest, you try to do the minimal risk. But anyway, not to get into that too much, but to just sort of show that I do feel like that is a way to also say to my daughter, I see you, I hear what you're saying, but my hands are tied. But let's see, what can you come up with? And I didn't see it as being aggressive. I think my daughter felt put on the spot, maybe. And so she didn't take it very well. But I was trying to tell my daughter, there's lots of ways to be ignored in a situation like that. And what your manager did was not that. So I don't know. I do feel like that there's ways to help young people understand that, if we had everything we needed, we wouldn't be in this situation. So if you're trying to make the best situation possible, especially when it comes to patient safety, that these are real issues that managers are worried about. And, as you're talking to younger people and you're trying to show them the burden of that responsibility, whether it's in your job, Alyssa, or my job or somebody else's job, there's different ways to create a teachable moment, outside of parenting, even when you're with younger staff and helping them understand. So I don't know. I don't know if that made sense, but it made sense to me at one point. I'll say that.
Yeah, I was gonna say it makes perfect sense, and I think it's a good kind of round out to this conversation because I think that there's ways to learn about or take away from when we have those experiences, whether it's like you were discussing about your daughter being asked like, well, what do you think about that? Her putting her 2 cents in, she's being provided with a voice. She's being said like, okay, like come, bring something to the table. Or like what I was suggesting of have a conversation and teach yourself something if you're not familiar with it. Or, just be curious or inquisitive about it too, so that you can have a voice next time. I mean, I think that those are two ways that we can kind of start to move the needle a little bit in a different direction. Though I think that it's still like there are circumstances and situations in which we won't have control over how we're perceived or how we are interacted with. But that's the other person's problem. It's not ours. And we have to be able to say, I do have that confidence. I do have the experience. I do know what I'm talking about. And if you're not taken seriously or you're not considered, you know, if you're not appreciated for what you're doing, I think that that's, telling of the other person rather than you. So I think that was what I was trying to get at as my like kind of rounding out thoughts. And I'll kind of hand it over to you and I think we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. And thank you for tying that loose end for me because for a moment I thought I'd gone off the rails, but glad that you brought me back. We are very excited to hear from listeners about this idea of being unseen. What curious, I'll throw it out there for discussion, especially for our Facebook page. I mean, are there times in your life that you have felt unseen? Are you feeling that that's happening as you get older, especially for women who are over the age of 60? Or, are there more similar people out there like me that have thought that it's fluctuated through my life, in and out different situations? So we definitely want to hear from you listeners, whether it's by dropping us an email at thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com or on our Facebook page. A lot of you reach out to Alyssa or me directly if you know us. We take feedback in any way we can. We are also very excited to hear about any comments or suggestions you may have for topics. And so please reach out to us. We really want to keep the energy going. We've been doing this now for about a year and a quarter, and we feel like the conversations are getting richer and more really complicated as we talk about different topics that apply to women across the ages. So, with that, I'm going to sign off for Alyssa Marie and myself. Thank you for listening. And please drop us a note and tell us how things are going for you. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.